Owen, what is happening? Yolande, I'm not sure, but I'm concerned about my part in it. It's an eviction of sorts. Owen, we're making a 6-inch map of the country. Is there something sinister in that? Yolande, not in Owen. And we're taking place names that are riddled with confusion. And Yolande, who's confused? Are the people confused? Owen, and we're standardizing those names as accurately and as sensitively as we can. Yolande, something is being eroded. What's particularly interesting about this passage is that the author, James C. Scott, inserts this before the contents page, the acknowledgement page, and before the introduction to the book. This insert is from a play by Irish playwright Brian Friedel. Set in 19th century Ireland but written in 1980, Friedel says the play is about language and only about language. However, it touches on many themes including colonialism, identity and culture. It's a fitting introduction to this book. Part 1. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's bad. I must say from the get-go, this book is fantastic. Scott has written one hell of a thorough, well-researched book here. For example, in chapter 8, Taming Nature and Agriculture, Legibility and Simplicity, Scott aims to explore why certain agriculture techniques in the West have not worked in developing countries, especially during colonial times. This reminds me of the fantastic book, The Mystery of Capital, Why Capitalism Triumphs in the West and Fails Everywhere Else. Scott highlights how native farming techniques are usually looked down upon by so-called Western experts. This book looks into high-modernism and how that ideology shaped many failed schemes around the globe. These experts who came in with snobbishness and arrogance couldn't understand local agricultural methods. Monoculture refers to the agricultural practice of growing a single crop species over a large area for a prolonged period of time. This approach is widely used in modern industrial farming due to its efficiency in planting, managing, and harvesting crops. Polyculture is an agricultural practice that involves growing multiple crop species in the same space simultaneously. This method contrasts with monoculture and is often used to create more resilient and sustainable farming systems. Polyculture can take various forms such as intercropping, companion planting, and agroforestry. Scott goes into depth about how experts coming from a monoculture in the West couldn't fathom the polyculture elsewhere. Quote, "The whole method of farming and outlook of the farmer are so entirely new to us that we are strongly tempted to call it foolish from an instinctive conservatism. Such is the case in Nigeria, where local farmers knew that polyculture was the best way possible to harvest their crops. Due to the complexity of rain, heat, soil, pests, etc., at times these local farmers' fields looked like a bomb site. However, only a few grasped that there was a method in the madness, and that madness is what kept these farmers and their families fed." Part 2. Institutional Privilege and Field Experiments. This book does a great job of showing how Western education and institutions don't hold all the answers. Scott makes an argument that another reason why these experts look down on West African farmers is due to institutional privilege. Because they come from the default position of being proven semi-right at least, probably due to the technological advances and economic ones that they have studied and benefited from. Scott doesn't dismiss that the experts could be prejudiced, but he does do a good job of linking the institutional privilege to the high-modernism ideology. Scott briefly turns his attention to the scientific procedure and how external factors can be an issue for it. Quote, "Complex forms of intercropping introduce too many variables into simultaneous play to offer much chance of unambiguous experimental proof of causal relations. We know that certain polycultural techniques, particularly those combining nitrogen-fixing legumes with grains, are quite productive, but we know little about the precise interactions that bring about these results." This links into what Scott says about how scientific experiments are ran. Normal scientific procedures looking to control variables besides one or two variables. However, for field experiments, there is a need to dive into complexities with the crops that normal procedures don't do. Scott highlights how the experts were uneasy about having to be pragmatic about their situation, which makes sense because they're coming from a more theoretical Western outlook on things, and chances are these so-called experts haven't had to actually survive on their theories and on their crops that their theory would harvest. But for the farmers, they're constantly running visual experiments, is a lot of trial and error because they have to get it right. The stakes are a lot higher for them. Denuoement. I focus heavily on the agriculture side of things, which is intriguing for me because I thought I wouldn't like it, especially after reading Chapter 3, Authoritarian High-Modernism, Chapter 5, The Revolutionary Party, A Plan and a Diagnosis, and Chapter 6, Soviet Collectivization, Capitalist Dreams. These chapters are as captivating as they sound. Scott goes into the downfalls of Stalin and how the likes of Luxembourg challenged him on his ideals. Scott portrays the brutal consequences of Stalin's implementation of high-modernist socialism in the Soviet Union. Scott critiques Stalin's top-down approach to social engineering, highlighting how it sought to transform society through radical state-driven projects like collectivization and industrialization. These efforts aimed to create an idealized version of socialist society but were characterized by their disregard for local knowledge and practical realities, plus just a general disregard for human life also. Scott argues that Stalin's policies led to widespread suffering, inefficiency and resistance as they were imposed with authoritarian control and lacked flexibility, responsiveness to the complexities of human and social dynamics. Ultimately, Scott presents Stalin's socialism as an example of how high-modernist ideology, when combined with unchecked state power, can lead to severe negative outcomes. Anyway, onto the rating for this book. Scores are out of 100, so for Seen Like a State, the scores are as follows. Usefulness 90, engagement 73, depth 88, accuracy 94, clarity 80, uniqueness 85, book cover 88, overall score 85.95. What a book. If the title has piqued your interest alongside this review, I'd suggest buying it. The engagement score is a little low, but that's because there are parts of the book where the technicalities can be a bit of a bore. Funnily enough, it took me quite a while to read this book because the first 50 pages, which chapter 1 consisted of, weren't as engaging as the rest of the book. If you read this book, how did you find it? And if you haven't, let me know if you're going to. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe so that more people can view this video, and please leave a comment. Thank you all for watching.